pleased to welcome Spencer Eccles, who's the managing partner and co-founder of the Cynosure Group, a Salt Lake City-based company formed to bring together resources of a number of countries' most significant family offices, including the Eccles family of Salt Lake City, to make long-term investments in private companies across a range of industries. Prior to co-founding the Cynosure Group, Mr. Eccles served as the executive director of the Governor's Office of Economic Development and did a lot of good at what's called GOED in the state of Utah, working. Were you appointed by our current governor or by John previously? By Governor Herbert for the state of Utah, which oversees the business, tourism, and film development, international trade, rural economic development, and the Utah Health Exchange. During his tenure at GOED, he facilitated the expansion or relocation of strategic anchor companies in Utah's urban and rural counties, companies that are projected to create more than 32,000 jobs. Now, that's a big number, but more importantly, we hope it's one of your jobs in the future, and $2 billion in new state revenue over the next decade. Mr. Eccles remains an advisor to the governor on economic development issues and has been involved on numerous public and private boards, including as chair of the Governor's Economic Council, a vice chair of the Utah Science, Technology, and Research, USTAR, Initiative, vice chairman of STEM Action Center, and a member of the Utah Capital Investment Board, which supports venture capital investment firms to grow Utah's innovative companies. Previously, Mr. Eccles provided leadership to web-based software and material technology companies in the U.S. and abroad. He was formerly affiliated with Wells Capital Management, part of Wells Fargo Bank, and in 1997 was part of the Salt Lake City Organizing Committee for the 2002 Olympic Winter Games, where he oversaw premier Olympic downtown competition, as well as the Alpine Paralympic events. Mr. Eccles received his MBA from BYU's Management School and a BA in History from the University of Utah. Today, we hope we can turn his blood just a little bit green as he's here at Utah Valley University. Spencer is a part of a multi-generational Utah family. The Eccles have been strong supporters of Utah's outstanding quality of life, including sports, music, and most of the cultural events. Spencer has been involved with international ski racing since his youth, and has a love of hunting, fishing, mountain biking, and rock climbing. He'll have to tell if he's had any accidents in any of those things, because I have doing some of those. Currently, Spencer and his wife, Christine, and their three children enjoy Utah's great outdoor venues as often as their busy school and work schedules will allow. Please join me in welcoming Spencer Eccles to the stage.
Thanks. Well, good morning. It's kind of hard to see everybody up at the top. If you have questions, don't hesitate to interrupt me as we go forward. But I just wanted to share a few thoughts with you today, a little bit about, my history. And when I say my history, really my family's history, and more importantly, what I've learned from that. And I hope what you take away is that each one of you have a history, and getting to know that a little better, especially as you think about leadership qualities and you think about yourself personally and who came before you and what they did to enable you to be here today. Or maybe you're the gateway person. Maybe this is the first person to go to college in your family and you're going to create the path. Maybe you're the pioneer. And in our case, it was William Eccles and David Eccles. Let me just start by asking a question. So when you think about a leader, any thoughts come to mind initially? Anybody? And don't be afraid. Go ahead, yeah. Coach, okay. Coach, leader, anybody else? Example. Great. Anyone else? Father. Okay. Those are really good. So Merriam-Webster defines it as this: the person who leads or commands a group, organization, or country. So for me, it's nice to know what they do, but more importantly, what I think is something for us to think about is leadership. In the dictionary, it says the action of leading a group of people or an organization. But I think leadership is much deeper than that. And one thought about it is oftentimes is how do we measure leadership? Or how do we measure the effectiveness of a leader? A lot of times in a business, it's around monetary events, right? How profitable, what kind of exit did they have, or an IPO or a sale. We've had a number of those in a significant way recently, and we would say those people are great leaders. But those are really more outcomes as opposed to what it takes to be a leader and what it takes to have leadership. I think about vision, I think about direction, I think about caring, I think about passion, and I think about courage. Integrity is another one, someone who's inspirational, someone who's selfless versus selfish, and someone who's decisive, we mentioned clear direction, someone who's confident and listens, and someone who actually takes risks, right? And also someone who's willing to stand up for those around them. Those are things that I think about. So as I think back to William Eccles, who was he was a blind, indigent man. They lived in the slums of Scotland, our family did, back in the early to mid-1800s, and they weren't unlike anybody around, and probably very similar to all of your ancestors. The unique thing that I liked about him, and we talk a lot about David Eccles, and for many reasons because he was successful, starting a number of different companies and running them. But William, I think, is really the unsung hero in our family. He was the most humble, and he had, I would say, the most gratitude. You think about him jumping on a ship with his family in 1863, coming across with the Church of Jesus Christ Perpetual Immigration Fund. They put up about a couple $100, but the church put up $375, and he was able to take his whole family over on the ship, the Cynosure, thus the name of our company. And all this while trying to make enough money just to survive. And what he did was he had the ability of working around a lathe, and he would turn it with a foot pedal. And being blind, he had to kind of work his hands around it, and he would make wooden utensils and bowls and other things that then his children would go around the streets of Scotland and sell those, David Eccles being one of them. So this wooden bowl, for example, is about 160 years old. And somehow, just by chance of fate, my in-laws were in a meeting, and a woman stood up and told about how this bowl had been handed down for 3 or 4 generations. And William Eccles and David Eccles had traded that for a couple of dozen eggs. And they mentioned to them, hey, if you ever want to sell that, let us know. For me, it's one of my most prized possessions because it is a symbol to me of what hard work and just perseverance and probably a lot of luck can do for you. So this is the kind of guy that William Eccles was. He said, if the Lord has so decreed it that some men on earth must be blind, then why then should it not be my lot to be one of them? That was his kind of personality. And in fact, later in life, when they were able to, because he had cataracts, they were able to have surgery. He only had one eye done. And most likely, we speculate it's because he just said, I want to remember who I was. He was a very pious Scottish man. But this is one of the reasons why I think David's one of the unsung heroes of our family. And as far as a leadership quality, someone who is willing to take whatever life dishes out and just keep moving forward. So then along comes David Eccles. And in 1863, when they arrived in the United States, he was 14 years old. At 8 years old, he'd been selling his father's wares out on the streets, as I mentioned. And they got on a train, and they traveled to Utah. And they were stuck up in Eden, Utah. Anybody know where Eden, Utah is? I didn't think so. There's one hidden person over here. It's up near Ogden, up by Pineview Reservoir. And you got to imagine, okay, so these are folks that lived in the slums of Scotland, and now they've kind of worked, and they have a couple of oxen, and they have no idea what they're doing. And in that first winter, one of those oxen dies. So determined not to lose the second ox. They bring it into their log home with a dirt floor. I'm pretty sure that he wasn't trained really well or housebroken, but somehow they survived that. And once there was enough snow that he couldn't eat grass, the dry grass that they had in their mattresses, they were feeding that to him. Anybody know what happens to a cow or an ox after living on a really lean meal all winter does when he goes out on really green, beautiful grass? Anybody in here? Overeats. Hot grass. So after working and struggling all winter long, they take care of this ox. They put it out on this beautiful green grass, what we call hot grass. He gorges himself, bloats up, falls over dead. Now, I'm certain they didn't have insurance in those days. But this is just something as you go back in time and you look at your own ancestors and you take a look at what they did, they just have to get it back up and they just have to keep going. And so that's our second principle, perseverance. Unfortunately, that was not the first run-in that David had with an ox. Later in life, as he was developing and working hard, he had gone up into the northwest with some of his family members. They thought they could fashion some spindles for the textile factories that were up there. They thought that might be an opportunity, but what David saw was all of the lumber and all the timber in the mountains, and he saw that if he could just work hard, and the harder he worked, the more trees he could cut down and the more money he could make. And the Transcontinental Railroad was being built at the time, and it was a perfect time for him. And he was a very hard worker, and not only that, but he was able to save. And so he saved up enough to buy a team of oxen. He was hauling lumber one day out of the forest in the northwest, and as is known to happen, it was damp. And one of the oxen slipped on the trail and slipped off the trail. And of course, they were yoked together. He dragged the other ox with him down to the bottom of the hill, and both of their necks snapped and died. And again, he was starting over. Those things happen in life, and so we just have to keep moving. And so perseverance is a key thing. And you think about this quote here in terms of work and accountability. So leading by example, he continued to work and continued to push forward. He had built up his team again, and he had a team of horses now, a couple of teams, several teams, and he had people working for him. And every morning they'd get up and they would do all the work to yoke the horses and get the teams put together and get everything ready to go. And he was so Scottish, not to be stereotypical of myself, but he was so Scottish that he was really annoyed by that. He said, I'm paying these guys to get all the horses and the teams ready. In fact, I don't think I'm going to do that anymore. I will get up earlier, and I'll get my several teams of horses and wagons all put together and ready, and that way when these men wake up, it's time to work. And that's the kind of guy he was. And later in life, he was so cheap, he didn't want to take a taxi, so he was running to catch a streetcar, and that's one of the things that did him in. He actually died chasing a streetcar, which leads to another era. But I think the important thing is work and accountability. So he was willing to work hard. He was willing to set an example for the people he worked with, and he was able to lead that way. But the important part here, and I'll touch on this as we go through, was he was incredibly fair to the people that he worked with. And sometimes we will act and behave a certain way in our life in a conservative manner, in a good manner, and it may not even impact us that dramatically, but it may impact our children very dramatically. And at the time of his death, Mariner Eccles, who was the oldest son of his wife Ellen, at age 22 had to take over his father's enterprises. And because David had been such a good guy going through and been fair and partnered really well with people, as he did that, people took Mariner under their wing, and really helped him along. So anyway, work and accountability, lead by example. Now, I'm going to share just some personal experiences, if that's okay. As I look back and I learned things from my father, and as I learned things from Mariner Eccles, my great uncle, and from David Eccles and from William Eccles, and I thought about all those different things, the opportunity came up. I was around 30 years of age. I was just finishing my first year of graduate school down here at BYU, and they came to me and said, hey, we want you to run the competition venue up at Snow Basin. And I was employee about 42 at the time. And I said, well, do you have a job description? They said, no, but you can write it. And I thought, wow, this is a pretty big undertaking. As I started thinking about, and because I had ski raced, I'd been to a lot of Olympics in my life. I had been to World Championships, watching them, or forerunning in some of them. And I knew what it took, and I knew that it was a tough task. And I thought, that's way over my head. I'm going to go into finance in either coastline. This is not on my game plan. This is not on my path. I can give you 5 names of people that can do a much better job than I can. And they said, no, we want you to do it. And so I gave it a lot of thought. And one of the things I ultimately decided, and I wrote it on a little scratch piece of paper so that I could get my head around what I was going to do. I had to simplify the task. And I had to have a clear vision of what we needed to do. So the easiest way I could do that was I said, okay, really, what do I have to do? I have to make a plan. I have to refine that plan over the course of 5 years, and then I have to execute on that plan. I can do that. And so for me, keeping it simple was really important. Breaking all the big tasks down into just some very, very simple ideas and concepts. And so we did. And we had the downhill up here at Snow Basin, the Wildflower downhill for the women, which was over here on the skiers' right side, the Grizzly downhill is skiers' left side, and they had the same finish area down here at the bottom. And we had about 1,500 volunteers just for the sport portion of the competition. About 800 or so on the men's side, about 700 or so on the women's side. And both those venues had to be ready at any given time because we may run a training run for the women in the morning and a race for the men in the afternoon. That was a lot, and a lot to think about. But obviously, and it's painfully obvious for most people that know me, I didn't do that by myself. So building a team is really, really important. And having a vision, having a clear vision of what you're going to do and being able to communicate, that's really important. The other principle about this was when you do something, not for $1, but when you do something that you're absolutely passionate about in your life, and that you can rally everybody around you that you're leading towards that passion and towards that one goal, when you do that, you will be successful, and I promise you. So the Olympics, we had a start date and we had an end date that we knew was going to occur. We knew that this was big. We knew that it was beyond ourselves. It was for the world. And so it was really easy to rally people around that goal and that vision. I've only had maybe 1 or 2 other experiences in my life, in my career, where I had an experience where it was just crystal clear about what you were trying to accomplish. And so it was easy to get everybody on the same page. But I think that's an important principle that's underlying all of this in terms of the vision. When I worked at the Governor's Office of Economic Development, we would hire people because we could never pay market rate for the kind of people that we were attracting. But I would use a term like this. I would say to people I was trying to recruit, and I recruited a person out of San Diego. I recruited a guy out of LA, former Utahns that were coming back home, but it wasn't really on their path, on their game plan. I recruited another friend that lived in Utah that I had total confidence in to come in. And I said to him, there's never a convenient time to give government service or to give service in general. It just won't happen. Things are going to come up in your life where it wasn't in your matrix. But when you look back, I think what you will find is you will have been prepared for that moment. And opportunities occur. The harder we work, the luckier we get, right? So in this case, we were able to recruit people. And our mission was to support 3 million people in the state of Utah. And it was really easy to get people rallied around that. But when I started, it was 2009. Just in August, September of 2009. Does anybody recall what happened in 2009? Okay, we had just entered into the world's worst recession since the Great Depression. We call it the Great Recession. March of 2009 had been an awful period of time. The stock market hit an absolute low at 666. In terms of the Dow, and we were wondering what we were going to do in the state of Utah. But remember how I mentioned early on, sometimes we manage our lives, sometimes we manage our businesses in a way that maybe is super conservative. You could be really aggressive and you could grow it very, very quickly, but you create a set of mores, a set of principles by which you're going to manage your business or your life. And you do that consistently over and over and over again. And maybe it's not something that is challenged in your lifetime, but you pass it along to your children. In the case of Utah, we had done that. We had a rainy day fund for education. We had a rainy day fund for our general budget. And we were in a position of strength. There was a company called Anderson Lumber, a company that David Eccles had been involved with and helped guide and direct. When we went into the 1980s, it was another time of recession. And the gentleman that ran that, Jim Beardall, he went through every business, and every second light was those fluorescent lights, those tubes, they pulled those out to save energy. They redeveloped, they redesigned their lumber yards, and they had been already in a position of strength, but they managed themselves really carefully through that recession. When they came out of it, they became very, very acquisitive. They went out and started buying companies. And then they ultimately sold and had a great exit. Utah was in the same position in 2009. We were well positioned, and we went on a buying spree. We were competing continually and consistently with Texas and California. Companies were fleeing California. And while other states were ratcheting down regulations on business, increasing taxes, Utah was in a good position. We had a flat rate tax rate on income tax, both for businesses and for individuals. Sure, we had our challenges, right? We're not perfect, but we were in a position of strength. And so my biggest fear when I started at GOED was that the legislature was going to lift their foot off the gas. And working with the governor, working with the legislature, and coming up with a very clear vision. And I want you to know, this was really, really presumptuous. For us to say that Utah was going to lead the nation and be the best performing economy, right? And be recognized as a premier global business destination. When we talked about that in 2009, everybody looked around the table at each other on my team at the governor's office of economic development, and we said, can we really say that? Can we really go out and do that? Well, the answer was we believe we could. And for a number of years, we've been top 3, most of the time, #1 state for business and careers on the Forbes list. We didn't know if we could do that. There are a lot of things that were out of our control, but this was very aspirational. And so we had a clear vision, and we had an objective, or objectives. And we put the objectives into 4 simple things. Again, remember, we go back here, we talk about simplicity. We wanted to be able to communicate to our team exactly what we were going to try to accomplish and how we were going to accomplish that. Underneath each of these objectives, we had outcomes that we wanted to have. Whether it was increasing the number of international flights, or whether it was driving business and helping facilitate businesses going into the rural communities, and I can't say that we did all that, but we participated in it, and you're experiencing it here in Utah County and around UVU, this explosion of innovation and entrepreneurship that really is a cultural secret component, secret sauce for the state of Utah. So anyway, have a clear vision, have an objective. So finally, we've got 2 more I want to share with you. David Eccles talked a lot of times when you're in a business, everybody just wants to know what the bottom line is, but it's much, much deeper than that. And so what he said, never work for money. And why is that? He says it's the wrong metric. You got to work for the business. You got to work with the team. And you have to build camaraderie around people. You have to create vision. You have to create passion. You have to create emotion within what you're doing. You think about Apple. Why are they so successful? They're simply making computers just like everybody else. But they're starting with the passion. What evokes an emotion in you? Why do you want to be with them, right? Why do I look around the room and I see nearly probably 60% of the people in here have an Apple computer? Why are they successful? They're focusing on the business. They're focusing on the people. People will gravitate. The right people will gravitate to that kind of business. So focus on the business. Share your success. One of the things David Eccles did in the late 1800s was, and I don't know if he was the first one, but he certainly was one of the pioneers, in order to share the business with the people that worked with him and that worked for him, he would basically give them shares and loan them the money from the business to buy the shares. And then the shares were paying a dividend, and the dividend would then pay the cost of the debt down on those shares. And so now you had people that had ownership in the business, and then they were successful further going on. So, final principle, giving back. We think about what is fulfilling in your life. How do you define success? How do you define leadership? And I think if you look around at the most successful leaders, they have a strong component that runs through them in terms of giving back. And so David said, I'm no more than a trustee of the money. I'm a steward, right? I must build and make investments for it to accomplish the most good, and I don't see where I can quit. So that was his mantra. Now, he died at age 63. Mariner took over at 22. He had 8 brothers and sisters behind him. Let's take it all the way back to William Eccles, starting out in the slums of Scotland, having an opportunity to come to the United States through the church with this perpetual immigration fund. Somebody gave him a chance. That culture somehow trickled down through everybody. And as they were successful, they remembered where they came from. And they remembered what they had. And so, if you take a look at what occurred following David, these are the children of David. Now, he had 9 children. 2 of them died early. But every one of the ones that lived and went on, they each set up foundations. And then their generation set up foundations. And the whole thought here that George, my great-uncle George that ran First Security Bank, he said, it's our duty to be mindful of our responsibilities and the problems that confront this country and pledge ourselves to aid in every possible way. I think great leaders can rally people around them and around concepts when they do things that are bigger than themselves, that are visionary. It's more than just making a buck, right? So, David said people need enterprise, not money, to achieve success. So that leads us now to the current generation. And Tom mentioned the Cynosure Group. We've gone from having operating companies to just having companies that we owned in the public markets, and now going back to being involved and invested in operating companies. Danny Payne here is with us here from our office and our team, and came back home to Utah out of New York to be with us and join our effort. And so what are we trying to accomplish now? We think about where we started back here in the 1800s, and now we're all the way up to the 21st century. And where are we going? You got to have a long-term vision. You have to build a team. And so we set out very specifically with a focus on building a private equity group that we thought would be different, that would break the model of what's existing. And so as we go forward, we're doing direct deals, we're investing in companies, we take a minority share in every one of them, and we think about what David did. He had great experience. He partnered with great people, both with integrity, and also people that had great intellect. He was really fair to the people that he worked with. And we call that alignment in our business. It's a buzzword, but we try to find alignment with the companies we're investing in, but we also try to find alignment with the people that are investing with us and whose money we're now stewarding and investing. and then we attract a great group. So this is just an overview of what we do. Here's a number of companies that we've had. We've had a couple of exits to date. And when we think about the bigger mission of what we're doing, we invest for a number of family offices and also foundations. And for every dollar that we can make them, that's another dollar that they can contribute back into the community. Because as Utah grows, and we're going to double our size in the next 20, 25 years, we're 3 million, we'll add another 3 million, we'll be 6 million people. 80% of those people will live along this 80-mile corridor, what we call the Wasatch Front, and going all the way up to Brigham City. We've got to do our job in terms of making money. And so that's kind of the higher purpose that drives us. It's not just about making a buck. Now, we all need to put 3 square meals on the table, right? That's important. We need to make money for the people that invest with us. But the real driving force for me is we've got to help the community. And if we do our job right, we'll be able to do that. So, very quickly, lessons learned that we're trying to pass along to our next generation. Stay together, keep it together, work together. So we find as a family that if we stay together as a group, if we keep the resources together and pull more in, we have more power to invest, we have more power to help, and then we work together. And sometimes that's not easy, especially as a family. It's not always easy, but you can do it, especially when you have, as a team, if you're talking about a company, an executive management team, if you're talking about a family, you can keep it together. And the way you do that is you have this primary vision and you have this primary goal, and that takes leadership, and it's sometimes uncomfortable. Prepare the next generation. I think this is really important, and these are concepts that we talked about. Again, harking back to your history. Each one of you has a history. Each one of you has heritage. And you're the gateway to the next generation. How are you going to pass that along? So humility, gratitude, hard work, accountability, responsibility, education, freedom to choose a role, giving people the freedom to choose what they want to do. Make it fun, generate passion, and then, of course, giving back. And finally, create a family of culture and principles. Give people an opportunity to experience what it's like to serve, to do something bigger than themselves. If we get really myopic, if we turn inwardly, we become very one-dimensional. And that shows up when you interview for a job. These are portable skills. I like to think about like job-specific skills, but what people hire for are these portable skills. Who are you as a person? Are you a leader? Are you willing to stand for something? Are you willing to take heat as you go forward to drive forward with ideas and beliefs that you think are important? And then finally, doing is preparing. Ultimately, as individuals, each one of you, as you're going forward in your career, at some point you just have to step into the darkness, right? And you have to do. And there will be times when leadership opportunities come to you. I hope you're that person that says, I hope the coach puts me in and throws me the ball when there's 2 seconds left, and that's going to win the game or lose the game, right? If I can use a sports analogy. We just have to dive in and we have to do. We'll never be 100% prepared for what's coming our way. And sometimes you just have to go. And in my case, it was the Olympics. I certainly wasn't prepared to do that. But I was willing to take the risk, and that worked out really well for me. It was a great experience. We had a wonderful team, and it kind of catapulted me forward into the way I think about life and the way I think about a job and how to do it. So, with that, a quote from the Bible, if you don't mind. So, think about what you have, what you've been given, where you live. There's a lot that we have that was just given to us, right? Even if you had to scrap to even be here today because you're working 2 jobs, you live in America, and you live in a place where people have fought and died so that you can do something great. So the choice is yours now. As you go forward in your careers and what you're doing, the choice is yours to make a decision as to who you're going to be and how you're going to do that. And the choice is, are you going to just kind of cruise along and let things happen? Or are you going to step forward and apply whatever leadership matrix that will work for you and leave the world a little better than it was when you got here, and create a pathway for the next generation that's following you, whether it be in your own family or whether it just be the people around you, your coworkers, etc. Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time. We have a couple minutes for questions if you have, and if not, then you go ahead. So the question was, I don't come from a family of Huntsmans or Marriotts, and how do I get my foot in the door? And I think a couple of things. First of all, I always am a believer, the harder you work, the luckier you get. And I would take a really close look at what you're doing, and first of all, decide where you want to be. Decide how you define success. And if it's in business or if it's in a nonprofit or in a service-oriented area, you got to decide what that is and then put yourself out there, right? You have to take a little bit of a risk, and you have to sometimes have people that know you really well help you assess your strengths and your weaknesses, work on developing those strengths, and I think then on the weaknesses, you work to mitigate those, but also drive yourself into an area where you can capitalize on those strengths. I think the cream always rises to the top, and I think you get an opportunity. Sometimes you do get in a situation where you're capped out, right? You have a boss or you have a person in front of you, and they're not going anywhere. It's like the second-string quarterback. He's really good, but he's got Steve Young in front of him. You're just not going to get there until he gets traded away. So then you maybe have to make a decision. Do you make a change in your life? But networking with people, that helps a lot. And I just think you have to work hard. I think back to David Eccles. He had nothing when he arrived here in the United States. I look at a lot of immigrants coming to the U.S. right now. And there's some that rise up and then some that don't. Some are lucky and some just have a knack. And so that's the best answer I can give you. And I don't know if it helps, but I've watched a lot of people, and I don't think it necessarily matters what your last name is as it does to who you are as a person and how hard you work. And defining success and doing what you have a passion for is really important there. That shines through. So I hope that helps. Any other questions? Go ahead, yeah. There's a number of books. I love Clay Christensen, right? How Will You Measure Your Life? That's a fantastic book for just kind of establishing a framework. There's another book called Measure What Matters. That's a framework for how businesses think about themselves. For me, if you go back to where I was when I was at the Governor's Office of Economic Development, we had a clear vision and we had objectives. And so Measure What Matters talks about having objectives and key results or outcomes. There's a number of books like that, but I like that one a lot. The Good to Great book, they tried to discount leadership. They tried to take that whole item out of the equation. And what they found out was, you know what? Leadership actually does matter. And that is what makes great companies great. Ray Dalio, Principles, that's a really thick book. You can get the Cliff Notes version and probably get the same output out of that. Radical Transparency. I think those are pretty good ones to start with, if that helps. Anybody else? Questions? Oh, go ahead. How to be fair to the people that work above you? Yeah. So you have your own business? I don't. But you have people that work above you or not? Yes. You do. So the question is about managing up a little bit, right? Does that make sense? Like, how do you help the people above you? Yeah. Hey, maybe we should ask Danny. One of the hardest things you can do, I think, is managing up when you've got a boss that just needs a little bit of help. And if you can help create an environment where it's a safe environment for people, where they can become vulnerable, right? Sometimes as a boss, if you don't know everything and you know that somebody behind you knows more, what you end up doing is stiff-arming everybody, right? Nobody's ideas. I don't want to hear from anybody. You shut the door, just kind of keep everybody at bay, and it's a dictatorship. So if you can help create an environment, a culture of kind of support, and Measurement Matters talks a lot about that, but also just in general, a place where having a central goal that everybody buys into, really helping people clearly define roles, and And then creating a culture of passion and fun, that helps. And then breaking down the barriers is really important, and it can't happen just in work. Lunches, maybe some off-sites, maybe some service activities, things that can help break down barriers. That brings people together as a team. There's nothing like a crisis in a company to drive a team together. And so I think managing up is a tough one, but you can help along the ways, and honesty is always important. And sometimes, it might not work out. It might be a person who just is not going to allow it, and either you have to leave because they can't stand the pressure, or because you can't stand working there. And so finding a company that has values that you share is really, really important. And you can only do that by doing. Okay, and I think, we got just maybe one more question if you have one. Yeah, go ahead. How to identify good character upon medium? Yeah. That's a question where, for example, if you're going to hire somebody, you're going to get a feeling about them. And sometimes it takes a number of times to find that out. When you shake somebody's hand and you can get kind of a sense for people, I always want to leave the door open if I have a bad impression of somebody initially, because they might not have had a good day. They might have had something that happened in their life that caused them to not be positive. But I think understanding who they are as a person. A lot of times when you're talking to somebody, you get really, especially in business, you get really focused on kind of what they're doing in their business, but understanding who they are as a person, taking an interest in that person, and you begin to learn a lot of things about them, right? One thing that my dad taught me, and this isn't going to fully answer your question, but one thing I learned from my dad, I don't care where he is, he's talking to somebody. And it may be the usher at the jazz game. It may be, the janitor in the bathroom, or it may be a CEO or the head of something. It doesn't matter to him at all. But he's reaching out to everybody no matter where he goes. And I think the more you do that, the more you learn about people. And again, that's a risk. That might put shivers down people's spine. Certain people in this room may say, I could never do that, right? But you can start small. And as you start out on that path, as you start, saying, just maybe it might be a big deal to just look at somebody in the eyes and smile at them and say hi. The one way to turn that around is, instead of thinking about yourself, think about somebody else, right? If you're really fearful of doing something, you just say, you know what, I'm going to make somebody feel good today. I'm going to compliment somebody on their work. I'm going to look them in the eye, I'm going to smile at them, and I'm going to try to make them bring a little light into somebody's life. The more you do that, then you get to the point where you can start having conversations with people, getting to know them. Then you begin to understand the character of people. And I think that's the best way. There's just certain things you're never going to know about somebody, but you can start to feel character the more you get to know them. Okay, I hope that helps. I hope it wasn't too long. Okay. You good? I think we're good, unless there's somebody pressing. Thank you.